it would be a really simple: make sure that the purpose for which you're employing coaching or anything else is connected to the outputs that you desire, that you're looking for. Just make that simple connection, right? What do you intend this to do? What, when and how will you know if that has been achieved? If you do nothing more than that, you've started down the road to looking at impact and evaluation.
Welcome to the Hands-On Business Podcast. Where else are you going to come to get tips, tricks, and advice on growing your business? As you know, what people tend to love about this podcast is that it is a place where you can hear real business leaders discussing systems, methodologies, and strategies that they have used to help them catapult growth in their business. So I'm your podcast host, Hakeem Adebiyi, and I've grown several small businesses to multi-million-pound enterprises and noticed that there wasn't really a place that focused on where I was, i.e. growing a small business. All of the content that seemed to be out there was about big business and often just a lot of theory and no practical implementable advice, which is exactly why I set up this podcast. So take a listen, enjoy, and start implementing the strategies that you hear on the podcast. Happy listening. I was in discussion with a business leader the other day, and he was belying the fact that his people weren't doing what they should. And they'd already restructured, and the return on investment still wasn't going in the direction that he wanted. So I asked, what sort of development have you been giving to your people? And I also explored whether or not he'd ever considered giving them some coaching. Now, his response was unrepeatable, but in essence, what he said was he didn't believe that coaching could help his return on investment. Now, I could have done with my next guest at that point, a person that I've known, sadly, for about 20 years, but we don't like to talk about that. And I now consider a very good friend. Now, Rob, or should I say Dr. Rob Kemp, he wasn't a doctor when I first met him, but this is testament to his desire to develop not just others, but also himself. And he's now completed a doctorate of coaching and mentoring at Oxford Brookes University in 2021. Prior to that, he completed an MSc in coaching and mentoring at Sheffield Hallam 2013. More importantly than that, in my opinion, is that he has 2 decades of coaching, practice, experience, and learning. And having worked with companies such as 3M, NAP, Chiesi Pharmaceuticals, to name but a few, he's going to be here to help me to discuss coaching for greater return on investment. So I'm delighted to welcome Rob onto the show. Welcome, Rob.
Thanks, Hakeem. Great to be here.
Great to have you on. So I always ask my guests to start asking, telling me about their backstory to establish a bit of credibility. So just talk to me about how you got into coaching. We've worked together loads in the past. Just talk a bit more about your commercial experience. So, because we're going to get into why coaching isn't really just a soft skill. It's probably one of the hardest skills you can have, actually, but it's called a soft skill. But I always like to bring out, your commercial experience as well as your coaching experience, so people can see that we're not just talking to a qualified coach, but you've got much more to your gambit than that.
Yeah, thanks, Hakeem. Yeah, I mean, it feels like a long story now. So I'll be as brief as I can. It started, I guess, I got into life sciences and the medical industries back in the late 80s and early 90s. And I started off, like many people who we know, Hakeem, in the field, doing field sales, whether that be in medical markets or pharmaceuticals. So yeah, I kind of cut my teeth really in that sort of place. And actually, at that point was the first time I came across coaching. I was working for Pfizer at the time, American forward-thinking company, and on a field visit one day when I had my trainer out with me, she got out a tape recorder. Remember the old press the button tape?
I do.
You said, I've done a coaching course, so I'm going to do some coaching if you're up for it. I said, yeah, absolutely, I'm up for it. And she pressed the button and we started a coaching session, a post-call coaching session, which I just found really useful, that kind of after action review, that kind of conversation after you've done something significant like seeing a customer. And I thought, this is really quite interesting. Why has no one thought of this stuff before? So that was my first kind of, and that must have been like 91, 92 maybe. And so my interest was piqued by this thing called coaching that I didn't really know what it was. So that kind of interest has gone throughout my career, whether I've been a regional manager or a national manager or in charge of learning and development or performance and development. that kind of thread of coaching has sort of been the kind of interest for me, really. Like, what is it at a personal level that you can work on with somebody that will enhance their performance? And I guess the short answer is, the luxury of being understood, a reflective space, somebody who's skilled to help you with your thinking process that then ultimately leads to kind of more effective action on your part. That's kind of my coaching journey and my sort of career journey. And I left sort of full-time work, if you like, or full-time corporate work in about 2007. And since then, I've been working as a coach and studying and learning and developing myself and developing other people.
Thank you very much. Go try to tie all that together. So what are the common misconceptions about coaching and its link to actually, I'm calling it a return on investment, but actually delivering quantifiable performance improvement? Why is it that so many people still misunderstand it? And what are those misconceptions that you've seen?
Yeah, I think at the root of it, from a really logical level, it's not the business that delivers results. It's the people within the business who deliver the results. So that'd be the first thing to say. If you want to change your business results, you need to work with the people at every level in the organisation, from CEO, MD, execs, board, whoever, through your management structure, right through to the people who are often doing the kind of work directly with customers. You need to be developing everybody. Because that makes logical sense. You're not going to change your results unless people do things differently. So the sort of kind of crux of your question, really, I think part of the sort of fuzziness around coaching is that it's often seen as a luxury, a sort of like a cozy conversation, and you and I have both worked in some very, very highly performance orientated environments where there's not really room for a fuzzy conversation, and it's not really the culture, and it's not really the style, and it doesn't do anything. And why would a company invest in somebody like me to have a cozy conversation with somebody? So I think there's that misconception. Thirdly, there's also the sort of slight difficulty of it is quite hard to measure coaching impact unless you have the right conditions, the right tools, and the right people doing it. So that's part of the issue as well. And I think if you look at some of the early sort of coaching efficacy, return on investment type work or studies, a lot of them tended to rely on a lot of estimation. Mm-hmm. So they would say, like the McGovern, the Manchester study, they'd kind of ask executives, what sort of impact do you think coaching has made? Now, that's rooted in reality, like people saying, well, actually, I started this project without coaching, I wouldn't have done so. And that returned this kind of investment for me. But it's still quite qualitative and a little bit nebulous. So what I've tried to do is to bring some independence into the whole idea of coaching return on investment, and to build a model that has both qualitative and quantitative elements to it, so that you can satisfy a group or a number of stakeholders around coaching that it's a good thing to do. Because often organisations are driven by those people who hold the purse strings from kind of CEO, MD through FD down to an operational manager or an operational leader. And that leader needs to be able to say, I've invested whatever, £500,000 in coaching for these reasons to do this thing, and I can show you what the impact of that has been over time. And that's kind of the holy grail, or the missing link, if you like, of ROI in coaching. Yeah.
Excellent. And that leads me perfectly to segue. So in terms of an example of that, because as you said, qualitative has always been there, I think. It's the quantitative element that has been very difficult to get hold of, which is probably one of the reasons why people, oh no, I'm not going to get a coach. Because as you said, it's a cozy conversation. It's all very fuzzy. So have you got any examples? I always say no name, no pat drill, because I don't want to get sued for anything, but just examples of what you've done and how you've done it and how you've demonstrated that quantitative element.
Yeah. So, I have. And I think in some contexts, it's a lot easier than others. So when you are looking or studying roles that have like a defined quantitative output, so take salespeople, for example, who've got a budget, they've got a target, you can look at historical performance and you can look at performance over time. So where there are roles that are quite limited in scope, actually, in terms of outputs, they're a lot easier to study than let's say, a CEO or an MD, where actually they're impacting on a lot of different areas, and it's quite difficult to kind of isolate those areas and the variables actually. But I've been fortunate enough to have situations where I could do that from a quantitative point of view. So I'll give you a quick example where I used a sort of a qualitative element that you could consider from something like Net Promoter Score. So like, would you recommend this coaching to a friend or a colleague? So that's a pure kind of, in one way, kind of qualitative element, isn't it? It's how we feel about something, our affect. Do we think it was a good thing? But that's not going to convince an FD, right? Or a sales director. Yeah, they enjoyed it. Good. I'm glad I spent £500,000 then. Super. Although, that said, there are a number of kind of well researched kind of well-being outputs from coaching that might well have value for organisations. But I was just being flippant. So there's that sort of pure, really qualitative element. Then I used a product called engagecoach.com, which is tool set that allows you to kind of measure things over time in terms of coaching. So it measures confidence, openness, and impact. Confidence would be like social confidence, self-confidence, task confidence, how capable do I feel of the job that I'm tasked to do. It measures openness. So how open am I in terms of communication, flexibility, readiness? How open am I to learning and learning processes such as coaching? So that's the openness construct. And then impact, like how successful do I see myself in my current context? And do I feel an emotional commitment and an intention to stay with my organisation? And that can be from both a self-report or from a 180 or 360, so other people's view of you. So that's kind of quite a strong kind of quant measurement, importantly, that measures state, not trait. So a lot of the things that you'll have come across in the past, Hakeem, a lot of things measure who you are, not how you are. And, we've, again, name no pack drill, we've both used tools that are like, well, this is who you are. You're this color, or you're these letters, or you're this profile. And if you want to operate more effectively in this sort of context, you're going to have to flex and be different. Now, I get that. Okay, I get it. I understand that. For me, I find that a bit demotivational. I don't really want to be any less of myself. I want to be as much of myself as possible. Thanks very much indeed. So that's the kind of trait piece. And those traits are pretty stable over a lifetime, right? And take a great deal of effort to change. State is about your context and how you are now. And so I wanted to measure state, how you are, to be able to look at the start of a project and the end of a project. So, and in the middle was coaching. What has this done in terms of confidence, openness, and impact? And Engage actually has a bunch of tools built into it that allow you to kind of monitor that over a period of time. So that's quite a pretty strong kind of quant measure. And then the final piece that I measured was just purely the finances. Okay, so these were the targets that people had. This was the growth rate they had before they had the coaching, and this was the growth rate after they had coaching as a pure financial kind of ROI measurement. And in line with many of the coaching kind of return on investment or efficacy studies, the does coaching work studies, they all predict somewhere between a kind of 400 and 700% return on investment. And there are varying qualities, as I said earlier, around kind of prediction. In our study, we showed around about 500% return on investment, a 497% return on investment, just the pure financial investment, and a payback period of 6 months. So it was really... Now, okay, so there are a lot of ifs and buts in that, okay? It's got to be quality coaching. It's got to be, the right sort of intervention. You've got to have the right coaches doing it. People need to be receptive to it. There's a lot of caveats within that. But the story that tells is from a qualitative kind of quasi kind of quant perspective and a fully quant perspective, coaching can be demonstrated to have an excellent return on investment. And I was fortunate to be able to, work in a kind of environment where the outputs were really, really clear. The reason that coaching was employed was very, very clear. So it was much easier to measure. And I also was fortunate to be able to set up a kind of almost like a quasi-experimental study where I directed coaching at half of the group of 100 people for 6 months, and then flipped to another half so that we could have a kind of coach group and an uncoached group in order to compare the financial results and all the other results that we measured as in that way that there was coached and non-coached. So I guess I would be the last person, Hakeem, to want to reduce coaching to a simple number. I really would be the last person to do that, because I think, there are many tangible and intangible benefits of coaching. I talked about well-being earlier, whether it's career coaching, whether it's somebody new in a leadership position, whether it's somebody exiting an organization, whoever it is in the organization, the coaching will be very different for a different purpose. But if you want to ask the question of does coaching work and does it give a return, my answer would be yes from my own research. I'd also go and look at Eric DeHaan's work. Eric from Ashridge, he wrote last year, maybe the year before, What Works in Executive Coaching, and he compares, I think, 34 randomized control trials of coaching in the first half of the book, and then in the second half of the book, he looks at some more qualitative studies. The conclusion that Eric DeHaan comes to is that at this point, with the number of randomized control trials that we have, we can be fairly confident that saying the coaching works. So the second half of the book is then, okay, so what works? Which is what I've spent most of my life doing, trying to work out what works.
And I think that most people who've been through any kind of proper coaching program, because there's lots of, I don't want to say charlatan, but there's lots of people out there that are calling themselves coaches. But as I said, I'm not going to go on there. But when you've been through a proper coaching program, I think it's very hard to argue that coaching doesn't work, because I think people will see it. And the figures you said, if you know nothing else, if you're going to get between 400 and 700% payback on your ROI in 6 months, if it was anything other than coaching, you'd snap someone's hand off. So why do you think? Because I know it still seems fuzzy, but even with all that data, why do you think that some companies are still reticent? Or actually, I suppose the question is, when you go in and you're obviously speaking to people about coaching, what are the main things that they're saying? Well, you might have all this data, but...
Yeah, I think there are a number of things, really. I think many organisations have a coaching relationship with people or organisations that they kind of just roll along with. I think there's a sort of inertia point. I would be encouraging organisations to partner with people who are prepared to have that return on investment conversation and also, state risk. If the purpose of coaching is to increase performance, then as a coaching organisation, how prepared am I to put my pay on the line of that? Am I prepared to do that? And I've done that on a number of occasions. Now, you've got to pick your projects well, because because of the measurement piece. Actually, you've got to be able to measure impact. So I think there's still the sense that coaching is different from other sorts of developmental activities. Like, nobody grumbles that people need to go and do regulatory training or safety training, or because they see it as it's a given. Well, we've got to do it. I don't want coaching to be seen as, well, we've got to do it. I want coaching to be seen as, well, why wouldn't we do it if we can demonstrate a return on investment? And, the greatest advocates within organisations that I've seen are those people who've been through coaching training and actually had significant coaching experience themselves. Then they're massive advocates, and people tend to then go and want to get, more training, more specialisation, more qualification, accreditation, credentialing, all the, all the things that could sort of surround coaching. Excuse me. So, yeah, I think there's a bit of a lack of knowledge. I also think there's a lot of lack of clarity in the market about, what constitutes a great coach. And I don't think we've done ourselves any favours as a profession, because if we can't, fairly crisply articulate what it is that we're offering, how do we expect people to kind of get a grasp on that and buy it? And I think that the stuff surrounding the profession doesn't help either, because we've got numerous professional associations. We've got the ICF, the International Coaching Federation, we've got the EMCC, the European Mentoring and Coaching Council, we've got the AC, the Association for Coaching, we've got APEX, we've got AOEC, we've got like a plethora professional organisations. Now we've got someone setting themselves up as a sort of self-appointed kind of ombudsman, like it's kind of a mess. And so, what I've seen recently with the entrance of AI into the market is that, coaches and coaching organisations are struggling because they haven't really done the work to determine what it is that they're offering. And if they can't do that, then how can they defend their business against AI? I can do it very easily because I understand what it is that I'm offering. So I think inertia, custom and practice of what people have always have done in organisations, stop them from doing something new with coaching, a lack of clarity about what is being offered, and then this kind of the noise around coaching. And I think whenever you see the growth of an industry, and coaching has grown pretty strongly over the past 15, 20 years, you see the entrance of the money, money coming into coaching. And it, from what I see, actually the money that's coming into coaching is coming from Silicon Valley and platforms. Ezra, Better Up, Coach Hub, all these kind of places that are providing platforms for coaching. That's where the money and investment is coming. So it would be naive of us to think that those platforms aren't already making significant inroads into coaching practice. I mean, what I'd like to see is an ROI study on AI coaching in organizations to see how that worked. There are efficacy studies of AI coaching. Most of them focus on things like goal attainment, and as you and I both know, like goal attainment is kind of a small part of the kind of coaching piece. So, so I can't tell you. I mean, well, when we worked at the same organisation, you were a massive supporter of coaching, and you and I resourced coaches, right? So we brought coaching into the organisation, having internal full-time coaches doing the job. So you just need more people who think like you and I, Hakeem. That's the real key.
Of course. And then in terms of the AI, because AI is, I don't know, it can be. I was speaking to a colleague who's an MD the other day, and he was saying, he said, yeah, you can cheat with it. He said, but for people like me and him, he said, it can help enhance your brilliance. Which I kind of get what he means, because I'm not going to use AI just to say, write me a blog and then I'll use the blog. You use it for idea generation, and then you use your own experience and your own, information to actually then build around that. So from a coaching point of view, because I've not seen much AI coaching actually, so just talk a bit about that and how that's infiltrating and what are the threats, not to you, but to business as a whole, because people always want to look at, well, that's the new shiny thing. Let me go and do that. Then how's that going to work?
Yeah, so it's an interesting area. So you'll have to excuse my voice, Hakeem. Sorry, I lost it yesterday. It's come back today. So excuse me if I'm a bit husky. Well, you'll know that a lot of the arguments around AI in general terms are around this idea of, well, it democratizes things. AI democratizes things. It makes things available to people who wouldn't have them otherwise. And I'm like, okay, yeah, no, I understand that. Well, it's interesting then, isn't it, that most AI coaching is being bought by organizations. Well, that's not democratization, that's commercialization. So it's a different thing altogether. So, there is a lot happening with AI in coaching. There's a lot happening around with AI coaches that you can go and kind of find on the net. And there's also a lot going on in terms of AI being able to look at coaching interactions and identify things like critical moments. And identify things like, okay, so how long was the coach speaking versus the coachee? How many questions did the coach ask? Where were significant changes in that hour and a half conversation or hour conversation in pace, tonality, pitch, pause? So AI can do that really, really well. And it can say, hey, Rob, go and have a look at minute 34. That seems like a significant moment. And you go and have a look at minute 34 and you say, that's it. Yeah, interesting. I mean, I kind of knew that, but that's interesting that as a coach, I know what my significant moments are. I don't really need AI to pick them out for me. But it might be useful in things like coach training, assessment, that it might offer some shortcuts. There's a bunch of stuff happening around how AI can help coaches organize, how they might be able to kind of prime coachees before a coaching session. So AI might be useful to kind of have a pre-conversation around what someone's trying to achieve, what their significant barriers are, what their significant assets are before you even speak to the individual. And AI can kind of summarize some of those things. It can help keep us on track and monitor and measure. When you're operating big schemes, multi-coach, multi-country schemes, it can help us to kind of keep control of some of the logistics, as just the platforms can anyway, just general technology without AI. So there's a lot happening in AI and a lot of investment in platforms, which may or may not have the AI component to them. My question probably would be, if you have the choice of having a human being, whether it's virtually or face-to-face, or ChatGPT, or its equivalent, OpenAI code, whatever. What would you choose and why?
And I think that's probably the same in most things, especially human interactions. Yes, if it's a back end thing, like you're writing a blog, you're doing X, Y, and Z. I mean, I played around with an AI video thing because, as you know, I'm writing a course. I've got a program that's coming out later on in the year. And I played around with like an AI version of me doing the introduction because I was thinking, let me see, because if this is really realistic, I could save loads of time because I just have to type in what I want to say. And you look at it and you're just thinking, it looks like me. It actually sounds a bit like me, but there's just something missing. And it can never, I can't say it can never because who knows, but at this point, it cannot give me the interaction that we're having now. That actually we can bounce off each other, we can think about, reflect upon our experiences, reflect upon things that actually haven't happened, hypothesize, all those things which are part of the human experience. And I think that that's the issue with AI for me. I mean, I use a lot of AI in lots of things, whether it's analysis, some video editing actually, because it can clip out stuff and find things for me. But in terms of that human interaction where I'm learning and being supported by another human being. I mean, I could never say never, but I can't see myself using any sort of AI coaching for anyone, well, for me or somebody I worked with in terms of the way you were explaining some of those platforms. I think it's almost like an abdication of the human experience and spirit to a level, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think you've hit right at the heart of it there, Hakeem, because actually, if we consider coaching a process, a machine can do that better than a human.
Yes.
Okay. So if it's the grow model, what's your goal? Where are you now? What opportunities do you have? What are you going to do if it's grow? Actually, AI can do that better than you or I. But coaching for me isn't a process. It's a relationship that sometimes utilizes processes.
Yeah.
And that's the difference. And so no matter how technologically adept and how much AI develops in the next years and decades, doesn't matter. All that will happen is that we get a better facsimile, a more lifelike Hakeem, a better image. That's all we're going to get, improvements in that way. But for me, therein lies a danger in that, when AI gets so realistic, like with the deep fakes and all that sort of stuff, that we can't tell the difference between a human being, that's for me dangerous. And I think a lot of regulation needs to come. I think it needs to come in coaching, and I think it needs to come in AI. But for me, if your definition of coaching, like mine, is that it's a relationship rather than a process, or if that's within your definition, then you can never have a human-to-human relationship with a machine. You can have a human-to-machine relationship, and a lot of the therapy studies in AI are coming out now saying people do feel like they've got some sort of relationship with it. But critically, it's not a human relationship. And I think some of those critical kind of core embodiments of coaching, like, empathy, human understanding, humor, experience, all those things, like experience can't be replicated by a machine because it doesn't have experiences in the same way that we do. So I don't fear for coaching, human coaching. I think I don't think there's a case to answer, and in fact, I think that keep your eyes on this space. But I've just been co-writing a paper on whether AI is actually appropriate in coaching. Whether it's just a poor substitute or whether it should even be called coaching. So should AI coaching be called something else completely in order not to confuse it with the actual act of coaching, which can only be performed by a human?
Well, it's interesting because I think I go back to what I said before. I mean, as you just mentioned before, when we were together, we worked a lot on coaching. Even now, and you know me, I love tech. So I'm always the first person to get some sort of tech. So I've got no issue with AI. But whether now and if I cannot see myself bringing in AI coaching. As you said, the elements to keep track of stuff, to document stuff, fine, no issue with that. But in terms of that face-to-face coaching, because even, I mean, we can do coaching like this, and I know a lot of it has gone online, but even, and I'm a bit of a Luddite in that regard, I still prefer to sit with somebody in person. And I think that human interaction, and we're social beings, so having a being that isn't really a being, who can't have the empathy, the humour, and the spontaneity, because it's actually just running a lot of algorithms to say, oh, what's the appropriate response in this occasion? Well, actually, sometimes there isn't an appropriate response. You just know what the appropriate response is because I'm feeding off you, and therefore I know what I should say in this circumstance. And I think that's where AI has a problem. And I think that people who are leaning on it so heavily are going to have issues as time goes on, which, from my point of view, I actually quite like, because there's more and more conversations in every sphere, especially coaching, about authenticity. And the reason why that's becoming so popular is because of the proliferation of AI and those sorts of engines, because you don't have authenticity anymore. You know, you look at some of the posts on LinkedIn, it's just like, right, it's the same as 15 other people, because they've all gone onto ChatGPT and said, write me a post on leadership. And it's all the same stuff. It's like,
yeah, I know. I'm laughing because we've all done it. But yeah.
Yeah, but we've probably all used it to enhance our brilliance. So going back to the quantifications, obviously, I mean, we talked about sales, and there's certain jobs that automatically you think, yeah, well, I can measure that. So is there any jobs or any areas where you'd say, I'm not sure that coaching would be appropriate in those circumstances because you can't get that hard quantitative data? Or is there another way of getting that data when it's not so definitive?
I just think you have to rely on other proxy measures a bit more heavily. You know, that's all it is. I mean, it comes back to purpose. So, you know, for what purpose is an organisation employing coaching? Why are they using it? What are the outcomes that they're trying to achieve? And then just finding either direct measures or proxy measures of what those outcomes are. Because it doesn't actually matter that there's not a pound note associated to an outcome.
Yeah.
What matters is that the organisation is getting what they pay for, right? And if they're paying for a cultural shift, then measure the cultural shift. You know, if they're paying for, people to be kind of more engaged learners, you know, then measure that. You know, there's lots of measures that you can use. It's just that the only one that has a pound note associated with it is actually a pound note, if pound notes actually existed anymore.
Nothing to do.
It's a fiver or whatever it is. So I don't think it's difficult. I just think that there's in evaluation and impact measures, one measure will not satisfy all the stakeholders. And value means different things to different people. The kind of the trick or the approach, if you like, is to try and capture those data points from a number of angles that will have different meaning for other people. Now, the study I talked about earlier, you know, clearly, you know, HR and the business leads, you know, they were really interested, of course, in the kind of cultural shifts that had taken place, the kind of behavioural shifts that had taken place, you know, and the business leads were very interested in the kind of return on investment. But really the only thing, let's be absolutely honest, that the FD, you know, was interested in was the return on investment calculation. And that's fine. That's okay. You know, that's what they're there to do. Value means different things for different people. Capture a range of measures around your project as well as you can, because not everything, you know, that counts can be counted. And not everything that can be counted counts, right? So there are intangibles that they're very difficult to measure, which is why people don't study them either practically or in the academic, you know, research, because they're just so intransigent, or they're just so difficult to kind of capture, so ethereal, that you can't really capture. That's okay. There are things you can capture. You know, you can capture retention, you can capture engagement, you can capture, you know, attitude towards learning, you can capture openness in communication, you know, you can capture all these things. And one of the reasons I loved Engage was because it just gave me those areas, like without me actually lifting any heavy weights like I had to with the quant stuff. You know, like it's inbuilt into the scheme. So I think my advice to anyone thinking about return on investment for coaching, whether as a practitioner or an organisation would be building, evaluate. I mean, to you and I, Hakeem, I know this is like literally play school. Think about your evaluation when you're planning your intervention, whether that's a training intervention, people, whatever it is that you're planning to do, whether it be coaching or not. Think about how you're going to measure and evaluate that before you start doing the doing. It seems simple, but it's often missed,
Starting with the end in mind. I think lots of people don't do it. They think, oh, we've got to do some coaching. Right, let's just get a coaching. And I think that's where you have a problem, because then you haven't really thought about, well, what is it you're trying to achieve? How are you going to measure whether that you've achieved it? And that's when you get, oh, well, it's not really worked, has it? Well, what's not worked?
Right.
Because you don't know what you were trying to achieve in the first place. So how can you say it hasn't worked? And that brings me to the next question. Because everyone's talking about authenticity, leadership, culture all the time. So how important is it, or how important is leadership in the success of a coaching program initiative in the business?
Yeah. I mean, critical. Without it, it's not going to succeed, because people. A little anecdote I have was I was working with an organisation, doing some kind of coaching training with their managers and trying to instill much more of a coaching culture. And the leader in question turned to me and my colleague at the time and said, "Well, I keep telling my managers that they need to coach." And we both looked at each other and went, "I think this might be the problem. I think this might be the problem here." It was just one of those funny moments where you can tell people all you like. It's not going to make a difference until you start to embody what coaching looks like as a leader. Then all they're going to see is that they're going on a training course to display some behaviours and kind of, do those things that you don't do as the leader. And as you and I know, an organisation betrays its values in those people who it makes successful. So if you want to look at how to get to the top of an organisation, you look at those people in those roles and you say, well, that's obviously how to be. That's if I want to be there, and some people do, a lot of people do, then that's how I need to be. Well, if they're not exhibiting any even iota of kind of coaching, then why would they? So it's absolutely critical. I won't go and do work now where people at a senior level won't engage in coaching, because I think that brings me on to something that was in my mind a little bit earlier when you were talking, which is the idea of, one of the problems of coaching, particularly in businesses, is that it's often seen as remedial. And if you think about, and I can think about the number of assignments I've had over 20 years of doing this, professionally. Probably one or two had the explicit remit of working with high flyers to kind of allow them to flourish and thrive and do what they want to do. And that was the best project I've ever had. It was like, look, we've got all these people, they're brilliant, they're doing well, they're hitting all this stuff. Go and work with them, see what you can release. And that was the best piece of work I've ever had. Right? But a lot of the work I walk into is remedial in nature. It's like, we're doing okay, but we want to do better. And these are our issues and problems, and these are our challenges. And so, coaching, if that's really true, that one or two of my assignments have been kind of around leveraging strength rather than kind of dealing with deficit, which it is, then coaching sort of carries a bit of a reputation with it, doesn't it? And people who are being coached are like, well, why am I being coached here? Why is my and so I do a lot of work at the start of a coaching assignment, when I'm working with somebody one-to-one, to say, look, this is consensual. Like, you don't have to do this. If you don't want to do this, we're not going to do this. That's fine. It's consensual. You need to want to do it. It's co-created. I'm not doing anything to you. We're going to do some stuff together if you're up for it. And it's power free. I ain't your boss. I'm not. I hold no more power than you do. We're going to work this one out together. And I think, that helps at the beginning of a coaching relationship to be able for people to go, okay, so it's not about someone having a nosy in at what I'm doing, and it is confidential. And this person is here for me, and it is about me getting better rather than kind of filling some remedial gaps. Because I think a lot of the time in organisations, people misuse the term coaching for training. And so what people really need is training. They need the kind of knowledge, maybe some practical skills, but they kind of need training. Right? They need some. Otherwise, in coaching, you get to the question of, well, what do you think you could do? And people go, I don't know. I don't have enough knowledge. I don't know what I could. I don't know what there is out there. I don't know. And if people are at that I don't know phase, and really what they're doing is having to go and find information, they probably shouldn't even be in coaching, right? They just
So,
lack knowledge.
and is there any reason why you think, because it's very specific in business, isn't it? Because I always look at this, and I always use tennis. I like tennis, and you're not going to find a top professional tennis player who hasn't got a coach. He's not going to say, "Well, I'm at the top of my game. I don't need any help from anybody." So I always find it fascinating that those top elite sports people use coaching, as he said, like those high flyers, to get the extra 1%, the extra 2% out, and then in businesses we're like, no, we don't need that. So why do you think that is?
Well, and it's an interesting point, and actually, of course, all professional sports people and those at the top of their game have a coach. That coach, though, is normally focused on the kind of practical implementation of their sport, okay? Rather than a sports psychologist or someone who's working much more on the kind of, I'm not saying they don't do that. Of course they do that. Yes, of course they do. But there's a big difference, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if you like snooker. I like snooker. It's a great kind of sport, like darts. You don't actually have to do anything. You just want. It's not like cycling, Hakeem, where you actually have to pedal. And I was just really interested, like how the talk of a kind of sports psychologist or a coach in that sense is being talked about a lot more now at elite levels. So I make a little bit of a distinction between the sports coach. They're all going to have a sports coach, of course they are. Whether you're a tennis player or whatever, you have a coach. But are you going to have somebody who you specifically work on your mindset with? And the answer to a lot of elite sports people is yes, they do. But that's often not the person who's their coach in a sports coach sense. So, yeah.
But I suppose my point was more about that elite sports people, and actually more and more elite business people, realise that they need the latter. They need somebody who's going to challenge them. They need somebody who's working on the mindset. Because, as we know, mindset takes you to a lot of places that if you haven't got the right mindset, you're not getting there, whatever your skills are, actually. So I find it interesting that if you look at some captains of industry, they will have some sort of mindset coach type person. But then when you get further down, maybe middle managers or whatever, are always thinking, "Oh, I don't need that." And you're like, "Well, okay, why not though?" So that I'm always struggling, and it might be just because I'm bought into it and I've seen the evidence and I've seen the way it works. But when I speak to people that don't believe in coaching, I'm always like, I don't really know what to say to you if you don't believe that it's going to have an impact on your team.
Yeah, I mean, like you, I'm a great believer in surrounding yourself with people in a professional sense who are within that relationship, who are there to help you, right? So whether that be a mentor, whether it be a coach, whether it be a peer who's particularly skilled at something, I just believe in this philosophy of helping, I guess. And sometimes that's people helping me, and sometimes that's me helping them. But if you're much more of a kind of individualistic kind of mindset, I've heard it so many times, the kind of, I know what I did in my career to get me here, and I've done it all by myself, and all that sort of idea, right? We have those people who are at the top of organisations, and it's very difficult to change the beliefs and patterns of a lifetime. I got here by my own merits. Nobody helped me. That sort of attitude. This namby-pamby coaching stuff, and now we've got to get coaches for everyone, and that's I understand how and those people generally are, pretty entrepreneurial, pretty driven, pretty smart in a lot of cases, though not all, but they are definitely persistent and resilient, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think like trying to change the world's view of coaching, the world of business's view to coaching is a little bit like trying to boil the sea, it's not that's great. It's not a great metaphor at the moment, is it? But it's a bit like that, isn't it? It's like trying to make an impact on such an established thing. For me, I prefer to go and work at a kind of smaller level, like a small coaching evangelist who goes and shows in whatever organisation how things can be turned around and transformed, to add measurement to that in every case. And sometimes it's absolutely possible from a financial perspective, and sometimes it's less so, but I still measure and evaluate. What I do know, though, is that there's a much bigger interest now from the kind of coaching community and from coaching companies to doing kind of impact and evaluation work. And I'm working with an organisation at the moment who just want me to go and look at their impact and evaluation models. Like, how can we measure? How do we know that we're making the difference that intrinsically, or instinctively we know we are, and people tell us we are, but how do we turn that into a case that then satisfies a number of other stakeholders? So there's an increasing interest in kind of return on investment, impact evaluation, and coaching really standing up for itself and going, well, this is why you would do it, not just because it's a nice thing to do and it provides me with a salary.
So on that note, how do you, because we've just talked about there's lots of different coaches out there, you've got mentors, you've got coaches, you've got a whole press of things. 2 questions. The first one is, what's the difference between a mentor and a coach? Answer that one first.
Okay, yeah.
Good.
In 30 seconds or less. Yeah, no. So a mentor, I mean, people have spent decades debating this, and actually you'll find the term coach mentor used in a lot of literature. A lot of the academics will tell you that actually there isn't really a difference. It's about dimensions and where you sit on those dimensions. I take a slightly different view because they feel very different to me. And so a mentor will have specific industry sector kind of knowledge, expertise. They have been there. They have done that. They have risen to a kind of a position of respect and authority within their field. They absolutely should use coaching skills within a mentoring relationship. Absolutely they should. But that's not all they do. They might advise. They might do other sorts of developmental activity. They might teach. They might connect. They might do a number of other things that would be completely, out of scope for coaching. So in that way they're different. You don't need functional expertise to be a great coach. And actually, I've always said that I'm a much better coach in areas where I don't hold functional expertise, because you're forced to ask simple questions about the basis of people's work, about why they do it, about how things work, that when you know an area, you kind of take a lot of that for granted, even though I try not to. You come with a whole kind of raft of experiences within that sector, and that can be unhelpful as a coach. So I've coached in all sorts of areas that I don't have any experience in at all, but it's not about knowledge or industry experience. It's about being able to hold, help, develop, cajole, provoke, support people's development within their space. So I think there's a big difference for me between coaching and mentoring, and it would, at its basis, hinge on that kind of functional expertise piece. You wouldn't get a coach, Hakeem, for example, going, well, or you shouldn't get a coach going, I think I've got a good connection. If you're interested in that, I've got a good connection for you. Well, I'll hook you up with that individual.
Yeah.
That's going on. That's intervention. That's kind of mentoring. So yeah, I mean, there's lots of papers on this, and there's lots of different views on this, but I like to keep it simple. Really, that's my view.
And then the second one, which I suppose links into that in terms of the fact that you've got to merge and you've got lots of people out there. So I'm a small business, or I might be a big business, doesn't matter really, and I'm looking for a coach. How do I make sure I get the right coach with the right skills that's going to help me achieve my return on investment goals? Because, we talked about earlier about 400 to 700%. Yeah, that's a good coach. That's not everybody.
Right. Yeah, it's a great question. And I remember when I kicked off 20 years ago on my website at the time, I was like, how do you choose a good coach? Yeah. I mean, I think personal recommendation is great, but not just, I know Hakeem, he's a really great guy, you'll work well with him. It's like, actually, I've worked with Hakeem, and he's brilliant on the return on investment piece. He's really good planning, he's strategic, he's an effective coach. So a recommendation that's about the coaching, not about the fact that you're a nice chap. So coming with some studies, if someone says to me, show me that this is a good investment, I'll go, well, there's a couple of studies to have a look at, and here's some literature around coaching, but these are my studies. And then I would look to how much the experience, the investment that they've made in being a coach. So if you've got someone who's got 20 years in, they've got a postgrad cert, an MSc, a doctorate, They've got a CPD record that goes back 20 years. They're a member of a professional association. They might have an accreditation or a credential. They give something back to the profession. You know, they might run a regional network for the MCC or a chapter for the ICF. It's not hard to spot somebody who really is in coaching for coaching rather than who really is in coaching for a check. It's not hard to spot. And it's all about those learning developmental activities, the kind of credentials and qualifications that you hold, and also caring about the profession. And if you care about the profession, then you care to some degree that there are professional bodies, and you know, what's your kind of contribution wider? Do you speak at conferences? Do you write papers? You know, where are you published? Now that's a big ask, right? That's a massive ask for most people. Yes, it is, but I believe that the role of coach is a privileged position, and I think that you need to earn that privilege. You know, which makes it kind of tough for younger coaches, doesn't it? Who are just coming in and they've got an RM5 or they've got a basic coaching course. Yeah, it is tough, but it's tough at the start of any profession. You know, if you're an accountant, you're not going to start here. You know, if you're a lawyer, you're not going to, you know, be at the Old Bailey. You know, you have to start small, and you have to start knowing that you're at the beginning of your journey. Even if you are 30, you know, I was 30, 32, 33 when I properly started on this journey. Even if you are, you're a beginner, actually. You know, you're just starting. So, yeah, I think my advice would be you need to check out your coaches properly rather than just kind of picking someone because they work for an organisation that you've worked with, or, you know, you've had some workshops delivered by an organisation and they've got coaches. Okay, well, have they? Well, what sort of coaches are they? Yeah. So, yeah, it's a bit of a minefield, and I don't think it's one that's sorted by well, if you hold a credential or an accreditation, then you must be a good coach. Yeah, I mean, don't start me on it. You know, I
mean, you use the example of accountants. Virtually every accountant in the UK will have the ACCA or whatever qualification they may have, and some are crap. So just because you've got a qualification and you've been able to pass some exams doesn't mean that you're effective in the role that you're actually there. So I think, you know, just as you mentioned there, the personal recommendation, people who've got studies, the experience, the investment that they've put into it. You know, you should be choosing your coach, like, in my opinion, like you choose an employee. And I had this conversation with lots of people. You're not just going to say, meet somebody or have seen somebody who's said, oh, I'm really good at being X. Oh, I'll employ you then. You know, you wouldn't do it. So why would you do that in other aspects of life? You've got to do your due diligence. You've got to do a bit of work to make sure that you've got somebody, because a coach can have such a significant impact, either positively or negative, in your business. Why would you just let anybody in without actually really checking who they are and the credentials? And I think you were just describing yourself then, actually, when you were talking about all the positive attributes.
Well, I was, Hakeem, because I'm a terrible self-promotion. Yeah, busted.
No problem with that. That's why you're on. And then, you know, it's been a fantastic bit of time to catch up. There's one question I want to ask. So if there's one thing, there might be several things that you want to leave the audience with about coaching and how it's linked to ROI, etc., what would that be? If they're not listening to anything else and you said, right, I'm going to snip up one thing that encapsulates everything you've said today, what would it be?
It would be a really simple: make sure that the purpose for which you're employing coaching or anything else is connected to the outputs that you desire, that you're looking for. Just make that simple connection, right? What do you intend this to do? What, when, and how will you know if that has been achieved? If you do nothing more than that, you've started down the road to looking at impact and evaluation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rob Kemp. Really appreciate your time. Always great to catch up, but even better to catch up on a podcast where we're actually talking about stuff that actually is going to be valuable to other people.
It's been a pleasure, Hakeem. Always a pleasure, never a chore.
Thank you very much. Well, that's a wrap, as they say, and absolutely nothing better than, you know, recording an episode with somebody who's an expert in their field, but also a very good friend. And, you know, the question about ROI, you know, the question about coaching and ROI is one which is very common in businesses when they're looking to improve their performance. And, you know, the suggestion is, why don't you get a coach? So if you listened to nothing else on that episode, Just remember when Rob said that all the evidence he has, including his own evidence and papers, and we can share some of those with you, was that if you do coaching correctly and you do it with the correct coach, that you can expect to see 400 to 700% return on investment and a payback of around 6 months. I don't think we need to say any more about coaching and return on investment. And if you want to pick up the show notes, head over to the salesaccelerationformula.com/podcast-show-notes, and you'll be able to subscribe to our mailing list and get show notes for every single episode. And as always, subscribe, like, and share with your friends, colleagues, and anyone else who you think may be interested. But most of all, keep the feedback coming so that we can continue to improve and give you more of what you like. Hope you enjoyed this as much as I did, and as I always do. Keep listening and keep growing.